to Ohio, when my city was gone. There was no train station, there was no downtown. Somehow it disappeared. All my favorite places, my city had been pulled down. But it used to parking spaces and all the way to go, Ohio.
Welcome everybody to Research Roadshow. Today today's episode is Ohio, the Heart of It All. And that was the great Chrissie Hynde with the Pretenders, who by the way is the only performing artist I've ever met in person. She's just as intense off stage as she is on stage. The reason I entitled this Ohio, the Heart of It All, was because a few days ago I contacted a friend from high school. We're talking about Christmas and the usual Christmas greetings, etc. And we got on the topic of the elections, and he was kind of taking the attitude, well, we're stuck with Governor DeWine. What do you want to do? We'll wait 2 years, and then we're really getting somebody really good. We just have to wait 2 years more, and then we'll elect somebody who knows what he's doing, who's honest and brave and true. And I kind of choked up a bit, and I said, Mike, it's not going to go like that. There is a little something called corruption, and I spent 30 years in Italy. The Italians did not invent corruption. They just refined it a little bit, right? So now I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for having said that. But the government in Rome, I have a lot of experience with the government, the current, the past 40 years of governance, between quotes, in Rome, and with the governance, again, between quotes, in Turin, the provincial and regional government. The situation in Ohio is critical, and we are seeing a lot of shenanigans. Let's use that word. We are seeing a lot of shenanigans in various counties in Ohio and in Columbus itself. We cannot wait 2 years. We cannot wait even 6 months. We cannot wait even 1 month. We have to start cleaning up our act in Ohio in order to set a precedent for other states in the union. Why Ohio? Why does Ohio have to be the first state to fall, the first domino in loosening these chains of the deep state? Because for one, we have it's now known, thanks to law firms like Morrison and Forrester, it's now known that Ohio is like the number 3 state for child trafficking. And everybody says, oh yeah, we know child trafficking is really bad. I hope it doesn't happen to my kid. I try to watch my kids when they're out in the backyard. And when they go to, if they go to a discotheque with, I know I'm showing my age here. If they go to a disco or a rave with their friends, I make sure that they're back by 11 o'clock. You cannot take that attitude. The situation is too dire. We have to, because child trafficking is such a big issue, and because it gets to it has ties to all other forms of corruption. All Ohioans have to go out the very difficult process of finding out how much their county, various entities, including but not limited to the county commissioners, know about the child trafficking or the washing of the money in their county. Okay. Now let's put up the first slide for tonight. Okay, why? Another reason I entitled it "The Heart of It All" was because of the various heart issues that are being found in people who have taken the quote unquote the jab. For people who've been jabbed, there's an increasing number of heart issues, and Dr. Peter McCullough has talked about them. Various other doctors have gone on the alternative news sites talking about these issues, but they haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about the major hospitals in Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, and how those, the big hospitals in those three cities are strangely being kept out of the news. Let's see, where did I put that graphic? Okay, let's, I can't find it right now. Let's jump to one of the motivations. What is the reason? If there is malfeasance within the medical industry in Ohio or any other state, what is the source? What is the primary driver for either pretending that these heart issues don't exist, and kidney issues and liver issues, but for pretending that these things don't exist, or for aiding and abetting some criminal factor involved? What is the primary driver? Let's jump to limits to growth. As many of you heard me talk about on Neighborhood News, The Limits to Growth was a very important book for me. A senior scientist at Edwards Air Force Base gave me a copy of Limits to Growth in 1990, and I hesitated reading it until like around 1998. But when I did finally read it, it was shocking to me how many things didn't seem right. I take that back. I wasn't really shocked back then, 1998. But certainly something didn't seem right about the calculations and the projections being made. Let's get it directly from the horse's mouth. Okay. Here's Dennis himself. He was an MIT professor. And this is the 50-year anniversary. Just a few months ago, they held the 50th anniversary of this very important work. Let's call it a milestone. It was a milestone work to show that the Earth was running out of resources. And let's play a couple minutes of Dennis's talk from the 50th anniversary celebration, or Zoom. It was actually a Zoom call with 8 participants. We're all in this together.
I appreciate the Club of Rome organizing this session. Thanks a lot to Till for getting all the logistics set up. It's been fun for me. Thinking back over the past 50 years. Actually, today is the 50th anniversary of the publication of Limits to Growth. The birth of Limits to Growth was a Club of Rome meeting up in Canada at Montebello, where our team first presented its preliminary results to all the Club of Rome members. I think that was in 1970. And so I've enjoyed the opportunity to kind of think back and try to understand how I could use time usefully today. It's been 50 years. There's been 10 books, thousands of speeches, dozens. This one, accomplished. In March 2nd, 1972, I stood up, yes, that's me at the podium, addressing a group of diplomats and others about our preliminary findings. You'll know, that's Aurelio Pache, the founder of the Club of Rome, and two of my colleagues, Jorgen Ronders and Bill Behrens.
Okay, let me stop right there for a second and point out Aurelio Pache, the amministratore delegato, essentially the CEO of Fiat during those years, and a member of one of Turin's secret societies. But we'll table that for another day. Aurelio Pache, it was a very important figure, and the powerful men who built Pache, who helped him make his way in the world, they'll come in at a later segment.
Gonella, who actually was the principal author of the book, is just barely visible around the corner of the podium on the right here. I was very worried about that presentation because it seemed to me that the main ideas would be totally obvious to everybody. And I was really worried about occupying an hour of all these important people's times by summarizing what we had done. But I did rehearse the study, and as it turned out, it wasn't obvious at all. The notion that the planet is finite and that growth can't go on forever, which we took into the study, is only now, after 50 years, beginning to emerge as a basis for conversation. So and of course, things have changed a lot in 50 years. In 1972, we made three main points. Present growth policies for global material consumption can't continue. If we had initiated those policies, then
Okay, let's stop here just a second, and I'll read these in case they don't show up on the screen. Present growth policies for global material consumption cannot continue. The most likely result is overshoot and collapse, but a sustainable society is still possible. The sooner humanity pursues the latter option, the greater the chance of success. Now, what's he actually saying here? He's repeating something that certain people of influence have been saying since 1870. We're running out of resources on the planet. And here you see in the primary graphic, well, one of his principal outputs. And remember, the computer was still relatively young in those days. I think that the computer that he was using had less computational power in terms of megaflops, floating operations per second, than a standard desktop computer in 2010. So let's, well, YouTube's not working with me. All right, in the meantime, he shows a graphic where all of the trees and other natural resources on the planet are diving towards zero, and they're going to hit zero about the year 2100, 2120. And if we don't do something right away, if we don't convince everyone to adopt a sustainable platform, a sustainable way of living, if we don't make sure that all the farms in the world are managed correctly, according to our vision of how a farm should be managed, the earth is going to boil over. Why is that important for Ohioans? Because right now, they're saying that you've all heard now of Agenda 21. And sorry about that. Where did Agenda 21 come from? Agenda 21 was the United Nations adopting formally what the Club of Rome and a few other sister organizations spread throughout the world had come up with. Limits to Growth kicked off a debate between essentially 1971 and 1984, in which leaders, economists from around the world met to discuss how to live better, how to live in a more harmonized way. And remember, I talked earlier about Justice Antonino Scalia's harmonization of legal systems. These debates were nurtured partly out of a grassroots concern for the planet, but also with a little bit of help from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, and associated friends and partners throughout the world. So this culminated in a United Nations policy or set of policies that are now known as Agenda 21. It was not supposed to be binding, but if you look at some of the Ohio-based companies right now, especially those in the life sciences area, you see that they believe themselves, the C-level, the corporate level believes themselves to be bound to Agenda 21, or at least the doctrines underlying Agenda 21. That's why we're seeing this corporate ESG, all this talk about sustainability. Every large company in Ohio every year puts out a report, kind of like in parallel with their, their, not the 10K, what's it called? Their annual report. They issue an annual report, and 2 weeks later, out comes their sustainability report. We are good global citizens. We are doing less, reducing our carbon footprint by 9% per year, et cetera, et cetera. And nobody in Ohio says, wait a minute, I'm for unsustainable practices. I want totally unsustainable practices. But the problem lies in the fact that it's these think tanks, especially those in Northwest Europe. It's these think tanks that are twisting especially in the minds and hearts of young men and women in states like Ohio, twisting their thought patterns, taking an innate desire to see a better world and forcing them channeling them into these policy-making bodies for the corporate sector. Now let's go back to the other graph and see if that's if YouTube will let me visualize that right now. Well, I hope we don't get a copyright strike. Okay, so you see the top line is the resources. They're all lumped together as one big thing called resources. And they didn't allow for some, like West Coast Carol has often spoke about, and Corky Goss. There are resources that we haven't even imagined yet. We don't have to use all the world's petroleum. Other forms of energy, EVOs, very high-tech solar panels. There are other options besides petroleum, and someone told me that there's 40 million tons of thorium. That's a good supply for hundreds of a year, at least 200 years. And by the time we run out of thorium, some other ideas will have come to the surface. But they believed, at least Dennis Meadows still believed, that they're running out of petroleum and that meant that they would have to chop down trees for firewood. So this graphic, or graphics like these, based on very simple computer models, became the basis for a lot of the shenanigans in Ohio. Okay, I didn't even share it. All right, finally, there's the key graphic. And you see that it's a fairly crude, it's a crude computer model. Again, the computational power of the computer that they used at the time was no more, in terms of floating point operations per second, equivalent to a 2010 model desktop. So this resources line at the top, let's see if I can blow it. No, I can't blow it up anymore. Shows the planet running out of resources. Now, let's get to the nitty gritty. So I've talked ad nauseum about Agenda 21. But how does the Agenda 21 as the prime driver translate into some of the key political issues that are facing Ohioans this month, the next month, and for the next year or so? Well, let's go back to this idea of the corporate social credit score, that every company should have a number should be assigned between 200 and 750 of how well the corporation is behaving in confront with the CO2, the nitrous oxide, other greenhouse gases, their cleaning up of brownfields, their treatment of water, and water is going to become a separate topic on Research Roadshow. There's a lot of developments in the keeping us safe from dirty water, keeping us safe again. So all of these factors go into determining a corporation's social credit. But I don't have a problem with measuring the corporation's level of pollution. For example, Exxon, limiting somehow Exxon's ability to pollute the environment, oil spills in Alaska, for example. I totally agree with that. But I don't think that certain think tanks in Washington and Boston and in Amsterdam are the way to do it. I don't think that those think tanks, they haven't cornered the market on good ideas or on the implementation, the proper implementation with people of free will to execute, to obtain those high level goals on reduced pollution. So effectively, a lot of people in Ohio, and there's a copy, I have to remind you that there is a copy of Agenda 21 on the desk of the mayors in many towns in Ohio. Certainly in Cleveland, Akron, Columbus, Toledo, and Cincinnati. There is a thick copy of Agenda 21 right on the mayor's desk. So one way that we can begin to attack the situation is grab 4 or 5 of our neighbors and ask to meet with some of the people in city council and talk to them, to show them this video. This is the Club of Rome's own video, and say, did you ever hear of a book called Limits to Growth? Have you actually read Agenda 21? Do you know what it's all about? Up until recently, politicians could always plug the ears and say, I didn't know anything about that. I just mind my own garden. I don't take care of those kind of things. Club of Rome, never heard of it. But Julian Assange proved, to his great credit, Julian Assange showed that most politicians do know about these documents. They do know how the Club of Rome and the organizations that preceded it came into being. They know about the Rockefeller Foundation. They know about the Carnegie Institute. So the citizens in each county have a right to demand that a elected official or his appointed bureaucrat begin to address how their specific actions, the day-to-day operations, are reflected in the will of the people and not in these United Nations directives, which we are supposedly not bound to. Okay, let's go to the next segment of the video. Okay, I know everybody wants to know, what about let's go back to the myocarditis, John, because that's the big topic of the day. That's what everyone's talking about. So how do these 6 people, and keep in mind, I've actually met some of the, some really good people who work for the United Nations. The guys and gals on the ground floor, they really think that they're doing something good for the world. They really do. But it's the policy. The best example I can think of is Lourdes Melgar from Mexico City. She was actually trilateral commission, but there was some overlap between the United Nations Energy and the OSCE and other organizations. But Lourdes Melgar, she is a very likable person. She's hardworking. She really believes what she says. She does not understand how compartmentalization works, and she doesn't see how her helping countries to establish policy can translate into something very ugly in the long term. Let's see, where was that? Looking for a specific graphic that was put up here. Sorry about this. All right, let's go back to Morrison and Foster for a minute. It has been said that a good number of politicians in Columbus and other cities around the world have been compromised. What does compromise mean? Compromise often means that the person has been put in a situation or participated in an event that he or she does not want their family to know, or their best friends to know, or their church group to know about. They were tricked into attending what looked like a fairly benign event, and in the end, they come out feeling very, they deeply regret having attended that event or gone to that party or whatever function it was held in. They deeply regret having gone there because now somebody that they barely know or may not even know in a faraway city like London or New York has a video or some other evidence of him or her doing something inappropriate. And in the case of European adoption consultants, they used European adoption to compromise powerful political figures, diplomats from many parts of the world. European adoption consultants is not a quote unquote conspiracy theory. It was a real entity operating from 1983, I think, until 2015. At which point the rumors were spreading far and wide about how many of these kids were disappearing or going into incredibly brutal environments. And at that point, the FBI was forced to at least give a show of restoring some kind of justice. So they closed European adoption down. I'm not saying that everybody involved with European adoption consultants was bad. I'm certain that the three women at the top were doing something very, very bad, but many of the people on the ground floor did not realize what was actually going on. But what I do have a problem with is all the people, especially law enforcement, who kind of knew that there was something very wrong with European adoption there in Strongsville, and they chose to look the other way. And this was allowed. People ask, even in the Morrison and Foster case, Morrison and Foster every month comes out with a list of the top 10 white collar cases, right? 10 white collar, what'd you call them? Trials or companies being sued on a criminal basis. And one of the top 10 crimes according to Morrison and Foster in March of 2020 was European adoption consultants. Very shortly after that news came out, Morrison and Foster had to pull that page off their website. Now, it could have been one of the other 9. I'd like to think that it was the European adoption case, because there are certain powerful individuals in Washington who were making sure that operation, European adoption, and its larger international operation kept on going, because they needed that compromise. They needed to have those powerful politicians and diplomats compromised so that they would play along with Agenda 21 and all the other things that it spun off. How does that translate into the current issues, all the medical problems that people are having? If you read Limits to Growth, it basically says anything goes. Anything that the United Nations or the IMF or the World Bank or any federal government or state government or provincial government around the world does to reduce our consumption of resources is a good thing. That's where we get Planned Parenthood. I'm not going to get into the issue of whether abortion is a horror or whether it is the fetus actually a baby. What really, really bothers me about the abortion issue is that young women in many countries were never given the option, were never told what alternatives there were to having an abortion. And many of them regretted it years later. There was a flow of information. The people who needed to know these things, the young girl and the caregiver, were not given information or were given false information by people in a position of trust. Why would they do something that evil? Why would they give false information to someone in a very precarious situation like that, because there was money. There was a lot of money coming in from indirectly from very powerful individuals, especially in Europe, in order to promote the idea that they're doing healthcare, that they were taking control of. Well, the best example is in the 1940s, we still had some states were still tying the tubes of people convicted of crime, heavy crimes, like murder. They were tying their tubes to in order to make sure that they didn't have offspring, because of the theory that very angry and violent people they consume more resources in the long run, and so we had to reduce the number of people. I'm not sure if Ohio was one of them, but in the states that did have these laws, they could tie the prisoners' tubes in order to make sure that they didn't have offspring, because that was justified by limits to growth, by the studies that showed that reducing the violent population also reduced the CO2, the nitrous oxide, et cetera, and so on. So why am I going on about this? Because these people in the graphic, they have placed, under the guise of doing something good for the planet, you know the old quote, the ends justifies the means. They have enabled a network of corruption, a network that to me and many of my peers here and at Neighborhood News looks like something approaching evil. We have to begin the process, the tedious process of looking at company after company. Many of them are like the Russian dolls. There's a shell company inside of a shell company inside of a shell company, getting to the root of who actually owns, or how is the money actually flowing? How are these, where was the money coming in for European adoption? Were there state senators, state reps, elected officials in Washington that enabled some of these things to happen? It's a very hard process, but that is the essentially what we have to do. Now, let's go take a look at Columbus. Okay, going back to my friend Mike, he says that we can just wait a couple more years, and then we'll get in somebody, a good crew in the Ohio Senate and in the Ohio House, and then things will really go a gonfie vele. Everything will be going well. The crisis will be over, and we can enjoy our lives. Well, let's take a good look at the city of Columbus, starting with Battelle. Mike, by the way, had heard of Battelle, but he had no idea what they actually did. Okay, share screen. Again, this is Columbus, Ohio. And why is Battelle Laboratories so important to our story? Because it is rumored, we've all heard by now about NIH and the CDC and the gain of function testing and loss of function testing and other kinds of experiments on the molecular level. But they don't know how there's a big gap in the middle. People don't know how people living, for example, in Grandview Heights, they have no idea what is actually done there in Battelle or across the street at Les Wexner's clinics. What do they call it? The Les Wexner's health center or wellness centers. Each large company, in order to survive, had to play its part in this one world, healthier world, bright, shiny new world agenda. If you were a medium-sized company with, say, 70 to 200 employees, and you wanted to make good for your shareholders, you wanted to produce some profit, you had to learn to play ball with the big boys. You had to start learning to play by their rules. And some of these rules included that you'd have to close an eye on things as simple as stem cell research. Is a lot of companies that refuse to do stem cell research for moral or other reasons, they went bankrupt because they'd find out that for some strange reason, like if they were making washing machines, if they needed a loan to, let's say they needed a $500,000 loan to make improvements so they could build better washing machines and increase their profit margins. Well, they never get a loan. Mysteriously, one by one, all the companies, and here I'm talking about late 1990s, early 2000s, all the companies capable of giving them money would say, "Oh, sorry, we can't help you." Why? Because they had refused to do the stem cell research. So, Battelle and George and Aaron Adler actually went down to 505 Main Street. I forget. They went to the headquarters of Battelle, and it was apparent that they were not welcome to film there. They were pretty much forced to leave and get as far away as fast as possible, as far as possible. Whatever they're doing down in Battelle, they don't want us to know about it. But if you live in Grandview Heights or even farther away, you have to start to get curious, to ask your elected officials who are supposedly there. They're taking $160,000 a piece of your tax money to quote unquote protect you, to uphold your rights as citizens. You have to demand that they find out, is Battelle doing something illegal there in downtown Columbus? Are they participating in any of the experiments that the NIH and CDC have doled out money for? Because if by pretending that these problems are somebody else's job, and I hear that all the time, John, I'm so busy. I've got 3 kids. I've got the mortgage. I've got a big yard. I have to rake up the leaves in the yard. I don't have time to go and find out what Battelle does. Well, there's the problem, right? The heart is one of the few organs that doesn't regenerate cells after a group of cells dies. So if your kid starts having heart problems, you have a problem. we all have to help each other understand the need of getting involved in the process, of getting in the face of our elected officials and their bureaucrats. Because, well, look at what happened during COVID. During COVID, we were told that we had to force each other to wear a mask. Why is that? Because by forcing each other to wear a mask, we were protecting the whole group, the whole city. And by protecting the whole city, we were protecting the individuals in the city. So even if I never go to see my best friend who lives 10 miles away, by wearing a mask and forcing other people to wear their mask as a civic duty, we protect everyone in the city. So my best friend is protected as well. Okay, this is the line of thinking that was pushed on us. We have to adopt, the Ospreys and other people in the truth community have to adopt this practice of forcing each other to a get in your politician's face attitude. Because by getting if we all make it a practice and ostracize the people around us who don't do it, then we can put a little bit of pressure on the politicians as a group to start doing something for the citizens, to find out all these cases of myocarditis. That's just one example. All these cases of myocarditis. Is there anything that Battelle does that actually could wind up in causing these, even as a side effect? I mean, a complicating factor. Is there anything that Battelle does that could be leading towards this myocarditis? Because there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money involved in the potential for drug sales. So there would be, what would you call it? We have to look closely at possible conflicts of interest, because if you're selling a drug to treat myocarditis, it would be in your best interest to not expose the factors, whether they be natural or man-made, that are causing heart problems to begin with, right? It wouldn't make sense if you've just invested $2.5 billion on a new drug that cures disease X. You're not going to expose that lead in the water causes disease X. You'd be shooting yourself in the foot and not protecting your shareholders. What am I really, really driving at? Morrison and Foster in the UK and various other companies, law firms around the world know that there's a lot of shenanigans in Ohio. And it is Ohioans' duty to start finding out, how bad is it? I know everyone says, don't ask the question if you can't stand the answer, but we have to. How bad is it? How much does my local representative know? How much does the people who are controlling the money, whoever's giving money to various entities? Oh, I didn't even get to the most important topic. I won't put it up just yet because I don't have any hard proof, but a fellow Osprey told me a few days ago that the largest store of chemical and biological weapons in North America is located not far from Ohio, and nobody knows about it. Officially, nobody knows about it. But you can tell because it has massive, massive, massive walls It's guarded better than Fort Knox, and it's posing as a retailer of sporting goods, of athletic wear. If this is true, let's say that there's some truth in this. Okay, there's a 20% chance that it's incorrect, but the satellites will show that there are very, very tall walls, 15-foot walls, very thick, and armed guards watching the way, just like the Berlin Wall. It looks just like the Berlin Wall did. There are armed guards posted every 100 feet along this wall, protecting the. What do you need that kind of protection for sporting goods? The level of protection at this facility is equivalent to the level of protection at a Fort Knox or an air base with nuclear equipped B-52s. It is stunning to see these photos. Now, why should someone in Garfield Heights, or what was that other, or here in Minerva Park, why should someone in Minerva Park be concerned about the world's largest chemical and biological depot being located so close to them? Well, because even if there's no malintent, or there's no direct, the powers that be don't have any direct desire to injure people in Minerva Park. Just an accident, a tiny meteorite comes and hits one of those 10,000 liter tanks of anthrax, and then hundreds of thousands of people in Columbus get very sick. So people in Minerva Park, as tax-paying citizens, have a right to know that people at the men at the sporting goods facility are actually hosting the world's largest chemical and biological weapons depot. They have that right, and they have the right to demand to go, and if there's enough evidence, circumstantial evidence, they have a right, not only a right, but a duty to go to their elected representatives and say, we want to know more about this. We want to know more. Anyway, I know that all of you are getting ready for the John O'Loughlin show. So I'll try to wrap it up pretty quick. One thing that we have to start doing is going and one thing that you could do. Now, this isn't for everybody. One thing that you could do is to go and get the receipts. Do what you have to do. If you suspect wrongdoing in your county, go and find any hard evidence in any way you can that things are just not adding up. Go and get the hard copies of, find out if, for example, the contracts, if they have government contracts, the government has an obligation to explain every $5,000 or every $5 million, who's getting that money and what is the purpose, the official purpose for that allocation. Okay, so do the hard work. Go down to your local library, a well-equipped library, and research who is getting the money for all of this biological experimentation, and out of which pocket, which of the government's pockets does it come? Out of which laboratory? Which senators voted for it and which senators voted against it? This kind of information is vital. We need to have more people looking at digging down and getting this circumstantial evidence in order to help local politicians confront the issue. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. Please send your comments and questions to john@researchroadshow.com. And please also send me show tips for the next show and things that you'd like to see, new shows, and what other ideas you have for getting the word out. How can we, as a group of truth seekers, do more, better, faster to get the truth out and to have more people wake up to what's going on and to take action, concrete action. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll play it out with the next segment, this segment of The Pretenders. I went back to Ohio, but my city was gone.
I went back to Ohio, but my pretty countryside had been paved down the middle by a government intent on fucking up this whole country. But the farms of Ohio had been replaced by shopping malls, and music filled the air. From Seneca to Cahoga Falls, I said I ain't always to go, Ohio.